Another day, another franchise primed for destruction by Hollywood. So yesterday came news that following The Hunt for Gollum, a film that no one asked for, Peter Jackson will then be working on another film with Stephen Colbert. I believe this will follow yet another girl boss female protagonist. That will follow a prequel, I believe. And I think it's mentioned that it's possibly Sam's daughter. Doesn't matter. Now, a lot of people are concerned, rightfully, that Stephen Colbert is attached to this project, and that is understandable. But I do feel we are, again, focused on the wrong thing. Now, I think some people are coming to this realization, but they will have to face this in the future. And that is that Peter Jackson has never respected the source material to begin with. We have elevated the films, rightfully so. In terms of what was produced, the acting, the production, all of that was phenomenal. But that is in large part due to the world that Tolkien himself had already created. If we examine the books and the films that Jackson produced, you'll note that there were a number of changes that he made to the source, particularly some of the core characters that drive the story forward. We talk often here about the war on masculinity, and I liken this to that because I think often we focus on the overt messaging that is shoved in our faces so often, but we ignore the more subtle and nuanced changes that are made. One of the examples I typically use involves the James Bond franchise. We go back to 1995 when Judi Dench was cast as M. M, of course, was a man in the Fleming novels. I believe Colonel Miles is his name. Maybe messing up his rank, but I believe Miles is his name, which is why the M. And so they changed M from a man to a woman. And at the time, people responded then, as we do now, when these small changes are made, we say it's not a big deal. It's fine. It's just a small change. Then fast forward a few years, and we have James Bond on the back of a moped being driven around like a child by a black woman. You don't get one without first accepting the other. And it is the same thing that we're seeing here with the Lord of the Rings. We have now come to the point where we're getting a Rings of Power, another girl boss driven series, the War on Rohim, and the animated movie that recently came out that no one saw, another girl empowered film. But again, as I've said, it didn't start here. This is just the result. This started with the Peter Jackson films and the subversion of the masculine that even he himself has taken part in. The prime example of that being with Aragorn, who in the books is portrayed as a very confident, competent, and some would say arrogant individual because he had purpose in the books. He did seek the throne and to reclaim his family's lineage and honor. These are things that he would often speak about proudly. And in true fashion, with the deconstruction of the masculine, Peter Jackson himself saw fit to remove those characteristics from the character. And so the one that we received lacked agency, doubts himself constantly, and had no desire for the throne because, again, that would be otherwise seen as what we now call toxic masculinity. If he was cocky and arrogant, that is how it would be framed. This idea that men do not have any purpose must be given to them. And so in the films, Aragorn, these responsibilities are thrust upon him. He never seeks them out himself. He never has a purpose and motivation. He has to be given that by several individuals. And chief among them in the films, his main his motivation ends up being a woman, and his promise to Arwen. These are the things that people often overlook. The fact that they're trying to present this rhetoric that men don't have purpose beyond that which is actually given to them. Of course, once they strip those qualities away from Aragorn, they then pass them on to Eowyn, right? The girl boss of the franchise, who, while she did have some of those qualities in the books, she was never presented as a girl boss. Much of what she did was driven by pure desperation, and survival. She did what she did because she had to, and it was often just recklessness. But again, this was war, and so she did what she had to. But in the films, it's presented quite differently, as though this is something that she wants to do because she needs to prove that she can do what any man can. You have the character of Boromir, who, while he dies fairly early on, his story resonates throughout the remainder of the journey that the characters go through. But Boromir's character, on his journey, he chose to seek out the ring to sort of for his fellow countrymen. This is something he wanted to actually do, but in the film they saw it necessary to remove that choice from him, and instead this is something his father thrust upon him and gave him that responsibility. Again, removing the purpose from these men. And so again, I understand the frustration with the news about Stephen Colbert having no writing credits to his name beyond his own show, but he's never been a part of a major film production. And I believe he's writing this alongside his son, who likewise has no writing credits for a project of this scale. There are valid concerns there, but I believe we've gone beyond that at this stage. I think the damage has already been done by Peter Jackson himself. He's already destroyed a lot of the characters, and if we were to get an accurate representation of the Ranger today, people would think of that strangely, that they've now changed the character, right? When in truth that was always his personality. But this highlights why I often say stories are so critical and they are so important for society. Because if we present the audience with Aragorn as he is in the books now, he will now be compared to the version that we got in the films, and people then feel as though this was something of a shift that and where it wasn't. And what they've come now to expect the masculine to look like, the masculine that he presents, is this very softened edge individual who lacks purpose, doesn't seek anything out himself, and relies on his a romantic angle for him to be driven forward. This is something that you see happening so frequently now, where the protagonists that are coming out in a lot of these Hollywood films, these men do not have purpose. It is often, very often, tied to a love interest of sorts. And men, you do need to reject this notion that you have no purpose beyond, beyond a female companion. All the things that we look at and enjoy in life today, civilization, modern civilization, are built on the backs of men who had purpose, who sought to change the world in one way or another. They weren't driven by desire for female companionship. And you must reject this notion that Hollywood is constantly pushing for men. And, we wonder why Hollywood is now creatively bankrupt, because there are no thinkers. There is no one attempting to um, go against the grain and push boundaries, because they not because they've been given permission to, but because they feel that is their purpose. So while I do understand the frustration with this news, I think we do need to come to the realization that this destruction of the Lord of the Rings franchise, the construction of the masculine that is constantly being pushed, this has been ongoing for several years, and it does include Peter Jackson's work. He himself has participated in its destruction. And while we've been inundated with all these female focused and female centric stories, spin offs, I think it's always interesting to note that among the members of the fellowship, there are no women. Tolkien didn't see fit to include one. We've spoken here on the channel often that the hero's journey, and that is what Lord of the Rings is, it's a rendition of the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a quintessential male story. It is a male story. It should remain a male story. And they'll continue to try to push a separate narrative that there needs to be a woman included in these stories. It would not surprise me if at some point when they try to remake the Lord of the Rings films, that they swap out one of the fellowship, one of the members of the fellowship, for a female character. And that is assuming Hollywood is still around, that, because this very notion that they're pushing is what has continually destroyed the industry. This idea of equity and female representation for a lot of these franchises that were made by men for men. And they will continue to push this narrative, unfortunately. So I have no hope for this. I think much like the Rings of Power, the public interest will just decline over time. And it's fairly obvious at this stage that the only reason that they are even making these films is to maintain the rights to the IP, because they're required to make films every few years, or it reverts back to its original owner. So they will continue to bastardize the franchise, and much like the others that we've seen, Star Wars, Star Trek, they will just continue to make these god awful spin-offs that will taint the name and the brand, and to the extent where people just have no interest in it anymore. And perhaps that is a good thing. I think we do need to return to the source material. So maybe this is good, that people will abandon the films and actually pick up the book and actually read what Tolkien actually wanted to present to us. We can only hope that if the Paramount purchase of Warner Brothers goes through fast enough, then it's possible that they can just cancel this project before it gets off the ground. But even if they do, I still feel that with the Hunt for Gollum, with the Rings of Power, a lot of damage has already been done to the Lord of the Rings franchise. So it may already be too late, unfortunately. I think unless there's a major shift in Hollywood, unless there's a significant change and all these quotas and diversity check boxes that they've been doing, unless there's a major shift and all of that is eliminated, and all the people who are pushing that are fired, then I think the damage is already done, and it may be too late to turn back. And I think another part of the problem is there's no one to replace them. These people that are in the company, that are rooted in the company, destroying it, there is no one to destroy them because the culture is creatively bankrupt, which is one of the reasons why whenever I do a video here, I encourage you to, especially the men, to pick up a pencil, a pen, and a paper and start writing. Because yes, we can sit and complain about the people who are destroying these franchises and the horrible stories they're telling, but why aren't you telling your story? And why aren't you in the room? That's something that I think we need to also discuss, because if we want to save these stories, we have to be involved. This idea that we'll just go our own way and watch everything get destroyed, it doesn't work, because they're, let's say we get rid of these people. We need writers, we need people in production, we need directors, and the only prominent people at present are directors that have been around for decades. You know, I don't think Quentin Tarantino wants to keep making movies until he's dead. But where's the next Quentin Tarantino? Where's the next Spielberg? Where's the next Nolan? We're not seeing any. All we're seeing are a group of people who are propped up, being given positions that they have no business being in. But without them, what are the choices? I hold Hollywood responsible for a lot of the things that they have done, but we also need to look at the public as well, and what we have chosen to not do. We've sat idly by while this destruction happens. We did it with literature that is now effectively dead. We've watched film and TV destroyed, that is now also dying. And gaming, I believe, is going to be next. At some point we will need to do something. We will need to participate. This idea that will men going their own way, this accomplishes nothing. And I think that is a slap in the face to all the men who have come before you, who have written all these brilliant stories, and they're counting on you to carry that legacy forward. So that is the unfortunate state of Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I think many of you, like me, have sort of lost interest in a lot of the projects coming out of this. And as I said, I think the only solution here is for a new group of creatives to sort of take over the reins and to save the industry if it can be saved. So it's in your hands. All right, thanks guys for coming by, and I will see you next time.